In my previous video about the 20th anniversary of the Rwandan Genocide, I quoted some sources. One of them was the powerful film Hotel Rwanda of Don Cheadle. Another one was this book, An Ordinary Man. It's a biography of Paul Rusesabagina, who was the hotel manager featured in the film. What I want to do here is basically read the opening, the preface of his biography, the introduction. And I want to do this because I think it's some very powerful writing. I mean, Paul Rusesabagina is not a writer by trade, but he would actually, his prose is great. But the point here is it's about a real event. It's about something very personal in his life, and I want to read it out because it's so moving, so poignant, I think. And yet level-headed at the same time. Needless to say, I don't intend any copyright infringement. What I'm about to read out is entirely the words of Paul Rusesabagina. The book is by Bloomsbury Publishing, 2006, so I want to be clear here, I don't intend any copyright infringement. Although I would imagine that if he chose to publish this book, he would want the information be known anyway. So bear with me, this is worth hearing, because I'm aware not everyone may be able to get access to this book. I'm not sure if it was a bestseller, so if you can't get access to this is some very interesting prose. My name is Paul Rusesabagina. I am a hotel manager. In April 1994, when a wave of mass murder broke out in my country, I was able to hide 1,268 people inside the hotel where I worked. When the militia and the army came with orders to kill my guests, I took them into my office, treated them like friends, offered them beer and cognac, and then persuaded them to neglect their task that day. And when they came back, I poured more drinks and kept telling them they should leave in peace once again. It went on like this for 76 days. I was not particularly eloquent in these conversations. They were no different from the words I would have used in saner times, to order a shipment of pillowcases, for example, or tell the shuttle van driver to pick up a guest at the airport. I still don't understand why those men in the militias didn't just put a bullet in my head and execute every last person in the rooms upstairs, but they didn't. None of the refugees in my hotel were killed. Nobody was beaten. Nobody was taken away and made to disappear. People were being hacked to death with machetes all over Rwanda, but that 5-story building became a refuge for anyone who could make it to our doors. The hotel could offer only an illusion of safety, but for whatever reason the illusion prevailed, and I survived to tell the story along with those I sheltered. There was nothing particularly heroic about it. My only pride in the matter is that I stayed at my post and continued to do my job as manager when all other aspects of decent life vanished. I kept the hotel meals colleens open, even as the nation descended into chaos, and 800,000 people were butchered by their friends, neighbours and countrymen. It happened because of racial hatred. Most of the people hiding in my hotel were Tutsis, descendants of what had once been the ruling class of Rwanda. The people who wanted to kill them were mostly Hutus, who were traditionally farmers. The usual stereotype is that the Tutsis were tall and thin with delicate noses, and Hutus are short and stocky with wider noses, but most people in Rwanda fit in either description. This divide is mostly artificial, a leftover from history, but people take it very seriously, and the two groups have been living uneasily alongside each other for more than 500 years. You might say that the divide still hides inside me. I am the son of a Hutu farmer and his Tutsi wife. My family cared not the least bit about where this was when I was growing up, but since bloodlines are passed through the father in Rwanda, I am technically a Hutu. I married a Tutsi woman, whom I love with a fierce passion, and we had a child of mixed descent together. This type of blended family is typical in Rwanda, even with our long history of racial prejudice. Very often we can't tell each other apart just by looking at one another. But the difference between Hutu and Tutsi means everything in Rwanda. In the late spring and early summer of 1994, it meant the difference between life and death. Between April the 6th, when the plane of President Juvenal Habyarimana was shot down with a missile, and July the 4th, when the Tutsi rebel army captured the capital of Kigali, approximately 800,000 Rwandans were slaughtered. This is a number that cannot be grasped with the rational mind. It is like trying all at once to understand that the Earth is surrounded by billions of balls of gas just like our Sun across a vast blackness. You cannot understand the magnitude. Just try. 800,000 lives snuffed out in 100 days. That's 800,000 a day. More than 5 lives per minute. Each one of those lives was like a little world in itself. Some person who laughed and cried and ate and fought and felt and hurt just like any other person. Just like you and me. A mother's child, everyone irreplaceable. And the way they died, I can't bear to think about it for long. Many went slowly from slash wounds, watching their own blood gather in pools in the dirt, perhaps looking at their own severed limbs, oftentimes with the screams of their parents, or their children, or their husbands in their ears. Their bodies were cast aside like garbage, left to rot in the sun, shoveled into mass graves of bulldozers when it was all over. It was not the largest genocide in the history of the world, but it was the fastest and most efficient. At the end, the best you could say is that my hotel saved about 4 hours worth of people. Take 4 hours away from 100 days and you have an idea of just how little I was able to accomplish against the grand design. What did I have to work with? I had a 5-story building. I had a cooler full of drinks. I had a small stack of cash in the safe. And I had a working telephone and my tongue. It wasn't much. Anybody with a gun or machete could have taken these things away from me quite easily. My disappearance, and that of my family, would have barely been noticed in the torrents of blood coursing through Rwanda in those months. Our bodies would have joined the thousands in the east running rivers towards Lake Victoria, their skins turning white with water rot. I wondered today what exactly it was that allowed me to stop the killing clock for 4 hours. There were a few things in my favour, but they do not explain everything. I was a Hutu because my father was Tutsi. I was Hutu because my father was Hutu, and this gave me a certain amount of protection against immediate execution. But it was not only Tutsis who were slaughtered in the genocide. It was also the thousands of moderate Hutus who were suspected of sympathising with or even helping the Tutsi cockroaches. I was certainly one of these cockroach lovers. Under the standards of mad extremism at work, then, I was a prime candidate for beheading. Another surface advantage, I had control of a luxury hotel, which was one of the few places during the genocide that had the image of being protected by soldiers. But the important word in that sentence is image. In the opening days of the slaughter, the UN had left 4 unarmed soldiers staying at the hotel as guests. This was a symbolic gesture. I was also able to bargain for the service of 5 Kigali policemen. But I knew these men were like a wall of tissue paper standing between us and a flash flood. And then I won't read everything there, but basically that's the opening words of Paul Rusesabagina's 2006 biography. Very, very powerful indeed. He was writing that 12 years after the events took place, but the words are still very poignant. And it's just very powerful. I've only started reading the book today, but I recommend it to anyone. It's a very strong testimony. I believe that Rusesabagina was basically one of the most documented survivors of the Rwandan Genocide, so he's a frequently cited source. Of course he's not the only person who would have poignant tales to tell, but it was his story that was turned into a film. He was known as Africa's Schindler. Another poignant thing is he mentions that before the genocide he was friends with Augustin Bizimungu, who was one of the leading Interahamwe generals, and Bizimungu was subsequently tried as a war criminal, and I believe he's serving a life sentence now for that. I don't know where, but Bizimungu was one of the most notorious of the generals, a man with a lot of blood on his hands. So this is very, very poignant stuff. There's no real purpose of this video except to quote what Paul Rusesabagina is saying. I know I've already made a video about Rwanda, but it was on such a scale. I mean, the largest genocide in modern times, and also the worst incident of racist extremism in modern times, if you consider it that way. Truly, truly sobering. And to think this was only 20 years ago. In other words, a child who survived the Rwandan genocide will only be about my age now, maybe a bit younger. If they were 5 or 6 at that time, they'd only be in their mid-20s now. So this is well within living memory. It's something that happened in our generation. And therefore it's up to our generation to keep the event in memory. Not to stir up pain of Rwandan survivors, but for the conscience of the world. And of course there's been subsequent wars and massacres, arguably genocide since then. But I do think that Rwanda is one of the most sharp and striking examples of human madness. And it really does defy comprehension. What happened in those 100 days, especially bearing in mind Rwanda is such a small country. I do want to get an opportunity sometime in my life to visit Rwanda or Burundi to see the legacy of this Hutu-Tutsi hatred. I think maybe some roads must have been mended since then, because although there's been the subsequent war in the DRC, and there's still tensions along the DRC-Rwanda border between the Paul Kagame government and Hutu militias operating in the DRC, I think the general hatred is, I'm not in a position to say this for sure, but I get the impression it's not as bad as it was in the mid-90s. I mean, when I look online, when you look at a lot of African conflicts, there's real extreme statements from both sides, from cyber comments. I don't see that so much with Hutus and Tutsis, so maybe this was it took a genocide for people to wake up and realise this was madness. And it's true that Belgian colonists exploited the differences, but Rwanda is a sovereign state, so it's now the responsibility of Rwanda to reconcile. I don't want to say too much about Paul Kagame as a president because I don't know everything about him. I know he's considered a strong man. He's been in power there for a long time, and I watched an interesting video about urban developments in Kigali. There's ambitions for Kigali to be the Singapore of Africa, which are certainly very grand ambitions. Part of that program is moving people from the city centre into developments on the outskirts, which by African standards, and I don't want to sound patronising with that, but by African standards are pretty good. By the standards of developed countries, they would look pretty basic at best, but certainly they're not shanty towns. They look clean, they look relatively modern, so it's certainly a grand project that the Kagame government is putting forward, but it's kind of halfway there, and it's a video worth checking out. Just type in Kigali developments. Apologies, I can't remember the exact title, but it is worth checking out. And the video mentions nothing of the genocide, which is interesting. Okay.